Hello, my name is Fausto Garza. I will be presenting an intelligence analysis brief regarding the current threats posed by domestic terrorists in the United States. The topics that I will be covering today will be the major tactics and targets of domestic terrorists, the evolution over time, and then I will discuss the tactics and targets of the far right, far left, and jihadist extremists. Also looking at data sources, and then we have a slide that represents all the references for the information presented in this briefing. So let's start off with the major tactics of domestic terrorists. Bombing and explosive historically have been the preferred tactics of domestic terrorists, followed by armed assaults. Some domestic terrorists resort to armed attacks either against individuals or institutions. This can include shootings or other forms of violence to further their ideology agenda. Also, they've used kidnapping and hostage taking. Some groups engage in kidnapping or hostage situations to draw attention to their cause or force concessions from authorities. In recent years, with the invention of the internet, cyber terrorism has grown exponentially. So with the technology, domestic terrorists have evolved to use cyber attacks to disrupt critical infrastructure, steal sensitive information, or spread propaganda. So now let's look at the major targets of domestic terrorists. Normally, we look at government institutions. Domestic terrorists often target government buildings, officials, or law enforcement agencies to express their grievances against perceived oppressed policies. They can target religious institutions. Attacks on religious institutions can be motivated by hatred towards a particular faith or its followers. There's also targets against cultural symbols. Some terrorist targets cultural symbols or landmarks to make a political or ideological statement. They also target public spaces, crowded public spaces such as malls, transportation hubs, or entertainment venues to maximize casualties and create maximum fear out of their attacks. So through the evolution over time, shifting the ideologies of domestic terrorists have involved with some groups adapting extremist ideologies related to nationalism, racism, anti-government sentiments, or religious extremist. Use of social media has increased very much. The internet and social media platforms have played a significant role in the evolution of their tactics, providing a platform for recruitment, radicalization, and coordination of attacks. Another thing the internet has helped is global connectivity. Some domestic terrorist groups have established connections with international extreme networks, sharing tactics, resources, and ideologies. Adapting to security measures. As security measures have increased, terrorists have adopted their tactics to exploit vulnerabilities or find new ways to carry out their attacks. What has increased in recent years also is called the lone offender attacks, or as we call them, the lone wolf. There has been an increase in lone offender attacks where individuals are inspired by extremist ideologies but not necessarily be part of a larger organization. So let's look at some of the tactics that the far right, far left, and the jihadist extremists use. When we look at the far right extremists, they employ a wide range of tactics, including propaganda, dissemination, online racism, hate crimes, acts of violence. They also organize protests, rallies, or demonstrations to promote their ideologies. When we look at the far left extremists, they engage in protests, civil disobedience, and direct actions. Some may resort to property damage or sabotage as a means of expressing dissent. Additionally, online activism and recruitment are common tactics. When we look at the jihadist extremists, they employ terrorist tactics such as suicide bombing, armed assaults, kidnapping, hijackings. Online radicalization plays a significant role in their recruitment strategy and dissemination of propaganda. As you can see, all three really are using much of the internet media platforms to radicalize, to recruit, and to promote their ideology. So let's look at targets of these three groups, starting off with the far-right extremists. Often targets minority communities, immigrants, religious groups, or individuals perceived as threats to their ideology or worldview, places of worship, community centers, and symbolic targets. When we look at the far left extremists, they focus on institutions perceived as oppressive, corporations, government buildings, or symbols of capitalism. Their targets may include law enforcement, perceived oppressors, or entities associated with inequality. Now, when we look at the jihadist extremists, their targets typically target civilians, government institutions, military personnel, or symbols of Western influence. They also target individuals or groups perceived as opposing them or perceived enemies of the group. Now, the useful data that law enforcement can use to collect information could be threat intelligence, information, and activities on known extremist groups and individuals. We can do community awareness and education, information about the community, getting to know the community in depth, the demographics, the social areas, education to prevent radicalization from extremist groups. We can collect criminal intelligence data on individuals with links to extremist groups. We can use open sources, monitoring public available information such as Facebook, multimedia sources. We can look at infrastructure and critical asset information. We can look at data on critical infrastructure and the vulnerabilities that they might possess and the targets that they might possess. We can also look at the travel and movement patterns of individuals and groups, monitoring them and see how they associate with other extreme groups. Very key also is international cooperation and information sharing. Information sharing is critical that we share among all law enforcement agencies, especially with international countries, because now with the internet, with the connection of groups across the world, it's important to have those cooperations internationally. Other thing is cybersecurity data. Now that cybersecurity is such an issue, information on cyber threats, hacking activities, and online recruitment are very important. And finally, the legal and policy frameworks, those are very important in understanding what are the existing laws and policies governing these extreme groups and how laws can be changed, modified to help law enforcement in this effort. So finally, we have our references here in our slide presentation. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this briefing was informative and it will be helpful in the future. Thank you and have a good evening.